Principal Private Secretary to the First Minister, and begin by inviting Mr Summers to take the solemn affirmation. Mr Summers, please raise your right hand and then repeat after me. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm.
I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm.
That I will tell the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
That I will tell the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
And I'll now invite Mr Summers to make a brief opening statement.
Thank you, Convener. I thought that it might be useful to the committee if I briefly outline my current role as the Principal Private Secretary to the First Minister and Deputy Director of Ministerial Private Offices. I've been a civil servant working in the Scottish Government since June 2004 and was appointed to my most recent role as the PPS in February 2017. I have responsibility for over 150 staff and I have oversight of all ministerial private offices. Specific to my role as PPS, I have responsibility for leading a team of private secretaries within the FM's office. I attend Cabinet as an observer, and I have oversight of Bute House as the official residence. I also have shared responsibility for ministerial security. In relation to the remit of this committee, I would like to reiterate the response of the Deputy First Minister on the 6th of November. That is, that I had no involvement in the development of the procedure, nor did I have any involvement in the investigation of any complaints brought under that procedure. Other than carrying out and overseeing the requested searches of the First Minister's private office as part of the Commission diligence, I had no involvement in the judicial review. In terms of the JR, and specifically the Commission, I was asked on the 21st of December 2018 to search for any documents, emails, text messages or notes using a number of suggested search terms. Neither I nor the private office held any documents that fell within the suggested parameters. However, the request also specified that I should not limit my search if I felt any further terms may produce anything of relevance. On that basis, I declared 2 calendar entries for the 20th and 21st of November 2017 when I met Miss A at her request. For clarity, in both those meetings, the only people in the room were myself and Miss A. There has been some suggestion that I have not been forthcoming about my 2 meetings with Miss A in November 2017. I would appreciate the opportunity to briefly address this. On the 20th of November 2017, with the permission of Miss A, I shared the disclosure that she had made to me with my line manager on that same day. On the 21st of December 2018, when asked for the first time to search and disclose any documentation relevant to the Commission and diligence, I disclosed those meetings on that same day. On the 29th of October of this year, in response to the committee's letter to me, I again declared both these meetings on that same day for inclusion in the DFM's response to the committee. Other than this, I have not discussed with anyone the identity of Miss A, nor have I discussed the disclosure that she made to me in the 3 years since those 2 meetings took place. I am clear that at no point did I have Miss A's permission to share that information with anyone else, and so I did not. Finally, I would like to confirm that I had no involvement in the meetings or arrangements of meetings that make up the ministerial code phase of the inquiry. I give evidence to the committee on behalf of ministers and not in a personal capacity. I may be privy to information that is the subject of a contempt of court order. Like all civil servants, I'm also required to respect the Government's legal privilege and Law Officers' Convention. Therefore, I may have to stop to seek advice or follow-up questions in writing with detail to ensure accuracy and to comply with restrictions on the Government's evidence. I declare that I'm a member of the FDA Union. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Summers. And we'll go straight to questions. And first of all, we'll go to Margaret Mitchell.
Okay, thank you, Convener, and good afternoon, Mr Summers. Can you confirm who your line manager is, just for the avoidance of that?
Line manager at the time was Barbara Allison. I now have a new line manager. Barbara has since retired. Right,
thank you. And can you give a kind of flavour in general terms of your role for Principal Private Secretary to the First Minister, specifically for the First Minister? I mean, you've explained quite clearly the people you're responsible for, all of that, but more specifically what that entails in terms of being PPS to the First Minister.
So I'm not, I would think it's accurate to say, involved in the day-to-day running of the office, but for example, I attend Cabinet. If there are any interactions with the UK Government or the heads of devolved administrations, I'll be involved. Any issues of national security, I'm involved in those. Any interaction with the Royal Household, for example. Any issues around the First Minister's security, and also, as I said in my statement, around Bute House, and also the staffing and smooth running of her office.
Okay. And would you sometimes attend meetings in her stead?
No.
No. Would you have responsibility for her diary?
No.
None of that. Is one of your responsibilities to have regular meetings with the Permanent Secretary?
I used to meet the Permanent Secretary just before Cabinet started on a Tuesday, but with the COVID pandemic, we don't meet in person anymore, so that would be the only time I would regularly meet with the Perm Sec.
And did that happen regularly before the pandemic?
Sure, every Tuesday, yeah.
Okay, and can I ask if these meetings would involve the Permanent Secretary providing an update to you, or for you to relay an update from the First Minister to the Permanent Secretary on anything on various issues or what happened since you'd last spoken to her?
They tended to vary. They're fairly short and informal. We'd maybe talk about the week ahead, what the FM had planned to do, or anything that happened in the past week. They would vary, but usually they would be focused on the business of that week and what was going to be discussed at Cabinet.
Yeah, and can you confirm when you had these kind of updates meetings, if the development of the procedure, the complaints or the judicial review was discussed with the Permanent Secretary?
Not with me, no.
Thank you.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you very much, Camina, and good evening, Mr. Summers. Thank you for coming to see us. I'd like to take you back to those two meetings with Miss A, and obviously I accept that you may not be able to answer all of these questions based on jigsaw identification. Did you get an understanding as to the catalyst as to why Miss A had approached you in the first place?
So I could perhaps give a little bit of background. My PA had contacted me to say Miss A wanted to meet with me, and when he had asked why, she'd said it was a personal issue. So I had no idea beforehand why I was meeting with her. To be frank, I thought it was about essentially a job. In the course of that disclosure, Miss A had said to me that there had been an experience in the past that she wanted to share, and she wanted to share it in a way that would improve the organisation and make sure that no one else would have to go through that experience again. She was not making a complaint, but she wanted to assess her options as to how she may best share that. One of those options would be potentially speaking to the First Minister about her experience. And so that's why I can't speak for her, as I assume why she came to me.
So she came to you, given your professional proximity to the First Minister and as somebody who potentially would have the FM's ear on a daily basis?
I think it was more to assess various options, one of them being a discussion with the First Minister, and what did I think about that? I think that's probably...
And what did you respond to that question about when she asked whether she could have a discussion with the First Minister?
I asked if I could first of all take advice from my line manager. I'm very happy to say to the committee I was quite overwhelmed in that meeting. I'd never come across anything like this in my career before. And I asked if she would allow me to quickly that day share that disclosure with my line manager and no one else, to take advice and come back to her the following day. I came back to her the following day and we agreed that she would then speak to my line manager directly, which is Barbara Allison. At the end of the second meeting, I said that if she felt that she was not being taken seriously and no one was listening to her, that she should come back to speak to me, and if she wanted to meet with the First Minister, I would set that up.
And I take it because that subsequent meeting never happened, or there was never an arrangement made with the First Minister, that she was satisfied with the process as was adopted or taken forward?
Well, after that second meeting, I never heard from her again, and I didn't have... The only assurance I sought from my line manager, I think that week, was she receiving the support she needed, and did I have any further role in this? And my line manager said no, I did not, and that she was receiving the support she needed.
Okay. You say, and thank you for your candour, that it was an overwhelming meeting. I can imagine it was very distressing to hear some of those things. Did it occur to you at any point in that meeting that that if these allegations were true, that Mr. Salmond, who was still a private citizen, free, not in any way under suspicion, might pose a threat to other people? And as such, did it occur to you that you should communicate it to somebody within the SNP to suggest that they might have to look at their own protocols about protecting women around him?
No, it's a good question, and it did not occur to me. I think my focus and priority was on protecting her anonymity and confidentiality, and I was clear I didn't have her permission to share her disclosure with anyone else.
So the meeting that also happened on the 21st of November and the 24th of November with Liz Lloyd had no relevance to
No
your
relevance
meeting with
whatsoever.
Miss A. So there was never a disclosure of Miss A's concerns to Liz Lloyd by yourself.
There was never a disclosure of Miss A's concerns to anyone else other than my line manager.
I think that's it for now, Convener. I might want to come back in at the end. Thanks.
Okay. Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Convener. Good afternoon. Mr Summers, you said in response to my colleague Margaret Mitchell that you were not responsible for the First Minister's diary. Can you tell us who is? Is there a dedicated civil servant who is?
We have a diary team, so a diary manager supported by a deputy private secretary and assistant private secretary.
Okay, thank you. And would you normally, in your role, have access to that diary to see what the First Minister's engagements were?
Yes, I would look at it daily, yeah.
Okay. We've had evidence from the First Minister in relation to a meeting that took place on the 29th of March with Mr Jeff Aberdeen, formerly the Chief of Staff to the former First Minister. Were you aware of that meeting taking place?
No.
No. Okay. Were you aware of that meeting was in the First Minister's diary?
I was only made aware of that meeting in the media reporting during the trial.
Right. If that meeting had been in the First Minister's diary, would you have seen it? Would you have been aware of it?
I would have been aware of it, I assume, because we use we don't keep any logistical, political or constituency appointments in the First Minister's diary.
Right.
We do use them for scheduling, and then they're usually taken at the diary every 3 or 4 months. I would have seen it. But my understanding is it wasn't a meeting, it was an opportunity. I think Mr Aberdeen was in the 4th floor meeting a colleague and took the opportunity to meet the First Minister. So there would have been no reason for it to be in
Right.
the
But if it had been a political meeting, as you say, it wouldn't necessarily have been in the First Minister's ministerial diary.
If a meeting had to be scheduled for any time during the FM's working week, we would have it in the diary.
Okay, thank you. We know from the First Minister's evidence that there were meetings with Mr Salmon on the 2nd of April, the 7th of June and the 14th of July. Do you have any knowledge of these meetings?
My first knowledge of those meetings is when the First Minister told me in June 2018, and she then followed up with a formal note to the Permanent Secretary.
Right. And were these meetings in her ministerial diary?
No.
They weren't. And if there had been meetings on government business, you would expect them to be in the ministerial diary.
If there was anything to do with government business, I would expect them to be in the diary.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Convener.
Jackie Bailey.
Thank you very much, Convener, and welcome to Mr Summers. Having been a minister previously, I understand how important a private secretary is, and indeed a principal private secretary. You would know most of everything that was going on, and indeed in your role would have been close to the permanent secretary too. Is that a fair assessment?
No, I don't think so.
No?
I don't think I am particularly close to all the kind of detail. I think I said in my opening statement that I currently have 150 staff spread over 16 teams, and my job, I'm sorry, I'll keep this brief, but my job feels more like 2 jobs rather than 1. I'm the PPS, but also head of I think the 3rd largest division in government. And while I try and strike a balance, it's near impossible and probably edges more towards the deputy director role. So it would be impossible for me to be in amongst the detail.
Okay, I accept you won't be in and amongst the detail. Let me put it a different way then.
Okay.
Because most private secretaries, I think, would agree with your description of trying to juggle too much. But somebody has once described it to me as almost like a relationship between a husband and a wife. You know what's going on. Is that fair?
No, I do not. I would not describe the relationship between myself and the First Minister as much as I admire her.
Oh no, I was meaning in
as a
general
husband and
terms.
wife.
I wasn't meaning you personally. Right? I was meaning in general terms. That's interesting, though, that you went there. Can I just ask you
Can I
then?
confirm I don't think it was me that went in this meeting?
No, it wasn't me either. Can I ask you, this committee wasn't told about your contact with one of the complainers until I think we received a letter from the Deputy First Minister. And why did it take a commission in diligence for the contact to be disclosed to the Court of Session?
So I didn't know who to whom Miss A would have disclosed that she had met with me, nor to whom my line manager would have disclosed. And until that point, there would be no reason for me to proactively give that information. My focus, as I said to Mr. Cole Hamilton, was protecting her anonymity and confidentiality. That was my sole focus.
Okay. You've said there were 2 meetings, one on the 20th, one on the 22nd.
No, sorry, one on the 20th and one the day after the 21st.
Ah, the
Monday and
21st,
Tuesday,
sorry.
yeah.
That's my error. And you told your line manager, Barbara Allison, about this?
Yes.
What was the purpose of the second meeting?
So the second meeting was for me to revert back to Miss A and say that I'd spoken to Barbara Allison and would she agree to meet with her and share her disclosure, and we would take it from there, or rather Barbara would take it from there. Miss A agreed.
Okay. Was there a referral to Gillian Russell from you or Barbara Allison?
Involved. No, I
You weren't
wasn't involved in that.
Okay. We know from an FOI that you were having regular meetings with the Permanent Secretaries, PPS and Liz Lloyd. I understand you're also friends as well as colleagues.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, and on the 24th you met James Hind. Now, as the First Minister's PPS, you will have been aware that they were all involved in the drafting of the policy. Yeah, okay. Are you telling us that you made no mention at all of the meetings with Miss A to the Permanent Secretary's PPS, to James Hind, or to Liz Lloyd?
So I would say 2 things. Firstly, and I know this is unsatisfactory, I don't recall that meeting on the 24th. Secondly, I can definitively and categorically say I made no reference to the meetings with Miss A at that meeting or to anyone else other than my line manager.
Okay. We know, for example, that when the Permanent Secretary heard about an alleged incident at Edinburgh Airport, she went directly to the First Minister to discuss that. But as the First Minister's PPS, you are her most trusted civil service advisor. You said nothing at all about this meeting with Miss A. You kept it totally to yourself. Didn't even tell the First Minister.
I wouldn't tell the First Minister because it wasn't my experience to share. It would be my first priority. Secondly, had I done that, I would have put the First Minister in a state of knowledge about something she couldn't have taken action upon at that point.
Okay.
In terms of any reference to that, to the First Minister, in June when the First Minister had told me that Alex Salmond had been in contact and that she wanted to do a formal note to the Permanent Secretary for which I would transmit confidentiality, I told her that at the end of 2017 someone had approached me and made a disclosure, and that I hadn't told her because I didn't have her permission to tell her, and I hope she understood that, and she said she did, and we shouldn't speak about it further.
Okay. Can I touch on diary meetings just very briefly? The diary meeting with Jeff Aberdeen, I understand, was in the diary on the 29th of March, but was subsequently removed. Do you have any knowledge of that?
I am as confident as I can be there was no entry in the diary for that date with Jeff
Okay.
Aberdeen.
Do you know where the meeting was actually held?
According to the First Minister's note, it would have been in Parliament.
Do you know, was it in her office? Was it in
I wasn't
a
there in
meeting
the space,
room?
I couldn't say definitively. I imagine it would be in her office.
Okay, so it was in her office. Did somebody collect Mr. Aberdeen from reception?
Again, I'm sorry, I don't know. I think if we refer to the FM's note, she said that he was already meeting a colleague.
Okay. No, just curious. And my final question, Convener, can I take you to the events of the 23rd of August, 2018? That, of course, would have been the occasion where you as PPS would have received a copy of, for the First Minister, a copy of the Permanent Secretary's decision report. That document, or at least part of it, was leaked at the time to the Daily Record. Can you tell us about the circumstances of the leak? And as far as you are aware, amongst the civil servants and special advisors, who had access to the report?
I can't comment at all on the leak. I don't know anything at all about it. There was an investigation taken forward by the Scottish Government where they asked us all to disclose any information we had. I've never seen the decision report. I've seen the letter to the First Minister on the 22nd of August, I think it was, not the 23rd. So no, I couldn't comment any further on that.
Do you know who received a copy of the report? Which civil servants and special advisors?
I wouldn't have been involved in anything to do with that.
Well, would you not be copied in to a minute saying, here's a copy of the report?
I would only be copied into anything that was to be transmitted to the First Minister.
But that was to be transmitted to the First Minister, was it not?
So the letter of the 22nd, is that the Permanent Secretary's decision report?
Yes, that's my understanding.
Apologies, I beg your pardon, yes. So I have seen that.
Okay. So you were copied into that. There would have been other people copied in? Who else would have been copied in?
I don't know. I could go back and check my records, but
Could you? That would be helpful,
Of
just
course,
to know
yeah.
who had access to the report.
yeah, certainly. Yeah. Sure.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Andy Whiteman.
Thank you very much. Welcome, Mr. Summers. Was Ms A the only person who's ever approached you as in your capacity as PPS in relationship to any sexual harassment complaints in the Scottish Government?
Yes.
Okay. What was your state of knowledge about the formal complaint that was made by Ms A in January 2018?
I didn't have any knowledge of it.
You had no knowledge it had been made, that's fine. What was your state of knowledge of the development of the new procedure whereby there was an explicit provision for complaints to be made against former ministers?
Well, I'm obviously aware that it was commissioned by Cabinet on the 31st. Contemporaneously, I don't recall, but I know from James Hines' testimony that the inclusion of former ministers was in the guidance, or the procedure rather, from as early as the 7th of November.
So, did you have any role in the development of the procedure?
No.
No. So we have in footnote 31 document YY057 an email from Private Secretary 1 to yourself with an attachment called Complaints Against Ministers, which is the document.
Sorry, what date was that, Mr. Whiteman?
Email from Private Secretary 1, 20th December 2017, 15:55.
Yes.
So that contains a Word document, which is a work in progress of the new handling of harassment complaints against current and former ministers.
Yes.
But why was that sent to you?
So 20th of November, I recall, was the date when the First Minister approved the procedure, and that document includes track changes from the unions. So I don't recall why I asked for it, but it may have been I was asking the Permanent Secretary's office, had the unions finalised their input into the guidance. That would probably be the most logical reason.
Okay, and it strikes me as odd that on the day they on the 20th of December, the new procedure was approved by the First Minister.
Yes.
So why were you sent a document that's full of track changes? Quite a mess.
I don't recall, so I can only refer to my previous answer that I assume I was maybe double checking that all the I's had been dotted and the T's been crossed.
Okay. Do you recall going through that document at all and having a look at it and considering any matters within it?
I wouldn't have any remit to do so, nor expertise to offer any value.
Okay. So it sounds as if it just sort of came into your inbox as a routine.
Yes.
Someone felt you should have it. As
Or
it were.
I'd asked for it.
Or you had asked for it.
Yes.
But you don't recall
No, I
asking
don't
for
recall,
it. No.
I'm sorry, no.
Okay, thanks. Convener.
Maureen Watt.
Convener, good afternoon, Mr. Summers. Clearly, you've reached the dizzy heights of PPS to the First Minister. Can you tell us a bit about your roles in the civil service before that? When did you join the civil service, and when did you join private office? And how many ministers have you served?
I joined the civil service in 2004. Initially, I worked in housing under supporting people. I then moved on to the Fast Stream graduate programme and did a number of posts. After that, I was head of drugs policy in terms of recovery. I then moved on to become the First Secretary for Scottish Affairs to the People's Republic of China. I did that job for 4 years before returning, and then 2 months later I became the PPS, the First Minister.
Okay, so you haven't served for any other ministers then, as private?
In this kind of capacity, never as a private secretary, no.
Okay, that's fine, thank you.
Angela Constance.
Just to follow up on that, Convener, Miss Bailey referred to her own ministerial experience, and of course there are 5 former ministers in this committee, but none of us have ever been First Minister. So I wonder if you could, as things stand just now, give us an overview of how private offices operate. So, for example, the average size of a junior minister's office, you know, the kind of the team in terms of functions around them in comparison to, say, a cabinet secretary, and then that of the First Minister. And you indicated that there was, you know, a diary team that looked after her diary, and there may well be other teams that do other functions.
Sure. So a junior minister would normally have a private secretary at I'll talk in grades, but if it doesn't, if you want me to confirm, I'm happy to do that. So they would normally have a B2, which is a mid-level civil servant, as their private secretary, and they would lead a small team, assistant diary secretary and a correspondence secretary. A cabinet secretary would have a more senior civil servant at a C1 level, leading their office, and they would potentially, if it was a large remit, have a deputy private secretary and again a diary and a correspondence. The First Minister has a private secretary and 4 deputy private secretaries. One of those deputy private secretaries leads the diary team. There's also a correspondence team of 2 individuals who deal with all the First Minister's correspondence. And we have a visits and events team as well who would lead on any events that the First Minister attends.
So is that about 10 individuals?
For the First Minister?
Yes.
Yeah, approximately between 10 and 12, I think. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thanks again for bringing me back in, convener. Going back to the meeting with Miss A, and I understand it was a difficult and traumatic meeting. Can I ask, at the time, during that meeting, did you ask her if she told anyone else what she was telling you?
I don't recall asking her that question.
Did she volunteer that she'd told anybody else?
She had said that she had reported it at the time.
Yeah. Sorry, to be more specific, did she intimate to you that she was having had the same conversation around that period of time in November 2017?
Not that I recall.
Not that you recall, okay. Did you suggest that she contact anybody else?
Other than referring her to my line manager, no.
Just referring it to your line manager. At any point did the First Minister ask if you were aware of the allegations or did she ask you if Miss A had ever approached you?
I'm sorry, could you?
Did the First Minister ever ask if Miss A had ever approached you?
No.
Okay, that's fine. So we know that you referred her to Barbara Allison. She had went independently, as we've heard in the previous session today, to Gillian Russell. Is it reasonable to assume that if you've got 2 routes there, one which is an attempt to take it to the attention of the First Minister, and a very understandable thing to want to do, one to take it to the organisation, to say this is an organisational problem. Is it possible that she might have taken it to someone within the SNP or somebody who might be a bridge to the SNP, like a special advisor at that time? It's clearly somebody who had something they wanted to say and get into people's consciousness. Do you think that was possible that she might have?
I don't think I can comment on speculation. I can't really speak for her. I can only say
Okay.
in terms of the engagement she had with me.
I understand.
And at that point, as far as I understand, she hadn't said she wanted to discuss it with anyone else or had done so.
That's fair. And final question, if I may. Was this the first indication you'd ever had about concerns about the behaviour of Alex Salmond?
So I was aware of the Edinburgh Airport allegation as well.
Okay. And prior to that, were you aware? I mean, we've established several times in this committee there was a low-level water cooler scuttlebutt about bullying behaviour by Mr. Salmond. Were you aware of that?
So I was aware he had a reputation for being forceful and at times intimidating. The only interaction I've ever had with the former First Minister was in my capacity working in China, where I worked with him for 5 days. And I didn't encounter any of that behaviour. I had no problems or issues.
Okay. Thank you.
Alistair Allen.
Follow up on what you said about the document search that you are in charge of undertaking. Can you just give us a bit of a picture of what that involved and what the criteria were or